Welcome to Author Stories, the podcast where we talk to the best writers in the industry and discuss writing and the creative process. Whether you're a writer, a reader, or both, we hope you'll find something here that makes you love books and the writers that create them. You can find archives of all of the great conversations I've had with authors over the years at hankgarner.com. Take some time and browse around there. I'm sure you'll find a new author to love, find inspiration for your own creative life, and find a new story to get lost in. Let's thank some sponsors who make the show possible. As the Crow Flies, Enter Haddon Wood, Book 1 by Risa Walker and Caleb Ansel. From Risa Walker, the award-winning author of the best-selling Chronos Files, and debut author Caleb Ansel, comes a chilling story of altered reality and psychological terror. Chase Ray sits perfectly still, his thumbs traveling across the screen of the broken computer tablet, stuck in the nexus between two worlds. Haddon Wood isn't real. It can't be. Another world, another reality, hovers just beyond his reach. He can see it sometimes. He can almost touch it. In that world, things are in balance. The dead stay dead and the creature feature remains safely on the screen. That world isn't a patchwork quilt of every scary book or movie he's seen. In that world, the nightmares generally end when you open your eyes and people don't glitch in and out of existence. Chase is determined to return to that world, although he's a bit worried that the only way out is through the noose that seems to lurk around every corner. He needs allies to get back home. But how do you choose your team when you can't tell who's real? As the Crow Flies, Enter Haddon Wood, Book 1 by Risa Walker and Caleb Ansel. Simon Says, the John Simon Thriller, Book 1 by Brian Thomas Schmidt. Master Detective John Simon is a tough, streetwise 17-year veteran of the Kansas City Police Department with a healthy disdain for the encroachment of modern technology into his workplace. When his partner is kidnapped after a routine stakeout by thugs with seeming ties to connected, wealthy art dealer Benjamin Ashman, he's determined to find the truth. But the only witness is a humanoid android named Lucas George. Reluctantly, he takes Lucas along as he begins to investigate and soon finds himself depending more and more on the very technology he so distrusts. Meanwhile, Simon's precocious teenage daughter begins to teach Lucas how to sound more like a cop using dialogue from famous cop movies. If only he'd used them in the appropriate context. This exciting new mix of near-future science fiction and procedural thriller captures the gritty realism of Michael Connelly's Bosch, the humor and action of Lethal Weapon, and follows the classic science fiction tradition of Isaac Asimov's City of Steel. From the editor of the international best-selling phenomenon The Martian by Andy Weir, and the national best-selling author of tales including official entries in The X-Files, Predator, and the Joe Ledger thrillers, comes the action-packed first entry in an exciting new series. Be sure to pick up Simon Says by Brian Thomas Schmidt and get into the series on the ground floor. Vedic by K.J. Heritage. The dead don't always die. Top company scientist Chin Jelinek has committed suicide. Vedic, a half-alive empath with no memory of who or what he is, will die in 6 hours if he can't find out why, or so the company tells him, an added incentive to get the job done. Our hero soon discovers he is one of the skilled, a genetically enhanced human revered and despised in equal measure, a bloodhound with a terrifying past who'll stop at nothing in his pursuit of the truth. And the skilled always get their guy, don't they? Vedic, number 1 by K.J. Heritage, on sale now. There's a link to it in the show notes. K.J. Heritage's uncanny sense of pacing and story puts him at the forefront of today's speculative fiction writers. Gritty, intense, and compelling, Vedic is something you don't run into often enough in sci-fi, a cerebral thrill ride you don't want to end. Prepare to lose sleep reading Vedic, delicious science fiction. That's what other people are saying about it. Find out for yourself. Vedic, the first book in the series by K.J. Heritage. The Unwelcome Trilogy by R.D. Brady. survivor, mother, leader, and humanity's last chance. Deep within the remnants of the United States, Lila Richards oversees a camp of 200 survivors. In a world where living is an everyday struggle, and only through banding together can people survive, the arrival of the unwelcome only made her job harder. Riley Quinn and Miles Jones have been raised by Lila for the last 5 years. They're also one of the cursed, the children between the ages of 13 and 18, whom the unwelcome kill on sight. No questions, no pleas, just death. Protecting one another and the people of their camp is ingrained in all of them. But now each of them faces increased danger as the reason why the cursed have been targeted by the unwelcome slowly comes to light. And that truth will shock them to their core. Now time is running out, not just for the cursed who are being hunted down by the unwelcome, not just for Lila and her family who will face the greatest challenge yet, but for all of humanity. The world changed radically 35 years ago, but today humanity's very existence is on the line, and the fight has begun that will ensure its future or its annihilation. Fans of A.G. Riddle, James Rollins, Suzanne Collins, and Brandon Sanderson will love the Unwelcome Trilogy. Pick up your copy of the Unwelcome Trilogy on Amazon today. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have my good friend Chris Pourteau on the show, and we're also joined by our special guest, Dustin Welch, an amazing singer-songwriter that I think you guys are going to love, and he's going to bring something really special to this episode, and we'll tie all that together soon. But we are here to talk about Chris's new book, Optional Retirement Plan, a science fiction thriller. If you've listened to any of the shows that I've done with Chris, you will have heard me berate him numerous times for not ever releasing this damn book. And we are finally here. So welcome to the show, Chris and Dustin.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Chris, Optional Retirement Plan, for folks that have not been privy to any of those conversations.
The myth and the legend.
The myth and the legend. Bring us up to speed on the book, who is Stax, Fischer, and why is this book just now coming out?
Sure. Okay, so I wrote this book about 4 years ago. It was originally inspired by the Bruce Springsteen song called Murder Incorporated, which is basically about an over-the-hill, older assassin who's sort of out of date. His tools are old, and it's time for him to go. That's sort of the gist of the song. And his work has gotten to him, in terms of his conscience and stuff. So, and then I read a book by Lisa Genova, and it was all about the damage that Alzheimer's can do to the brain, and how you lose every bit of who you are. And I had the idea for taking the idea of the older assassin character, putting him into a science fiction milieu, so to speak, and threw in the Alzheimer's as a curveball. And I was really into The Expanse at the time, the sci-fi series, and I of course love the Godfather movie and book. And so I decided to create this 5 factions that rule the solar system: Earth, Mars, Titan, Callisto, instead of 5 families. And they each have their own enforcers and their own sort of paramilitary groups that protect the individual factions, but they all have to work together to make the system work, the solar system work. And that was about all the thought I had given to the world, and because the story was all about Stax Fischer. He's very much a Mickey Spillane, Dashiell Hammett kind of character. The story is told in first person. You could even say it's a little bit. I don't want to use the word cliche because that's a bad sounding word, but it's very noir genre kind of idiom. Both his voice and the events that happen in the novel.
You're very true to those tropes.
Yes, that's excellent. Not cliche at all. Yeah. Very true to the tropes.
Right.
Right. So he's basically called into the Godfather's office. The character's not called that, but just to simplify it. And apparently he's been spilling company secrets to people he shouldn't be spilling them to. And of course, he doesn't remember any of this. These are the effects of Alzheimer's. And so the Godfather character gives him 3 days to get his affairs in order, and then he's going to permanently, quote unquote, retire him. So Stax is a real interesting character. His name is Eugene Fischer, called Stax, because while he's waiting for a mark to come into the Target site, he likes to read. And so it's a reference to the old, where you store books in a library in the back. So he's kind of a unique character. He just kind of came, I know this is a cliche. He came full born out of my head. There wasn't a character development sheet. There wasn't a motivation list of things that he wanted. He's just the guy from the Mickey Spillane and the Carver novel, that Dashiell Hammett novel. But he's 150 years in the future. So there are spaceships and advanced weaponry and things like that. But he is absolutely the Humphrey Bogart character from the 50s and 60s. So I wrote this book. I thought it was pretty good. It felt pretty good. I know every author that writes a book says that, but this felt special. And so I wanted to do something special with it. And I could not get an agent interested in it in the traditional publishing sense. I'd been in indie publishing by then for 3 or 4 years. And I didn't, what often happens is that an indie author, unless they're just a superstar, will put a book out. It'll do, really well for a short amount of time, might even grab one of those orange best-selling flags off of Amazon for a week or so. And then it just kind of goes into the back catalog for the rest of time or whatever. And so I didn't want to do that with this book. I felt that it had more to it than that. And so I sort of put it on the shelf. When David Bruns and I, a couple of years ago, were looking for a world to write about together, because we had written in another world together, sort of separately but together, the storyline was shared. I said, well, why don't we develop this world that's this one novel that I've never published is set in? And so we developed 2 trilogies that sort of give the background for that world. And so it was almost a back-engineered approach to storytelling, because I'd written this one novel about Stax Fischer and his problem, and then we decided to go back and back engineer six novels behind that. So that's kind of how it all came into being, and music was a big inspiration on this. Dustin's on the call here. I first saw Dustin in Austin. I believe he opened for James McMurtry at Threadgill's. If you know Austin, there's a music venue restaurant called Threadgill's. Loved what I heard and bought his CD that night.
I remember when you went to that show. We talked about it afterwards, and you told me that you discovered this new songwriter. And I think we talked about his influence on the book as you were finishing up this book.
Probably so, yeah.
But before we get too far there,
sure.
The Springsteen song was the original kind of instigation for this. When a song inspires you, and this happens to me all the time, I hear something and it's almost like, songs are such a weird thing because they're 3 to 4 minutes. It's melody, it's a little poetry. And the combination of those things can elicit an entire world just out of, and can just wreck you emotionally, can take you to a happy place, a sad place, a contemplative place. And it's kind of magic. That it's just this weird thing that can do what 100,000 words of a novel can do in 3 or 4 minutes.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so you hear the Springsteen song. What was the thing that happened to you in the beginning?
You mean after I heard it, the sort of eureka moment?
Yeah. How did this idea start forming because of that song?
Well, Springsteen is a great character painter, right? I mean, his characters really come to life because they're true to life, they're real people, kind of thing. And I just kept playing the song over and over and over again. I even learned it on the guitar. It's fairly simple in terms of chords. And I just kept playing it over and over and over again. And his illustration of what this guy was feeling, this ex-old killer was feeling, it just really stuck with me, And then I started saying, well, what if? It's not as easy as we make it sound in these discussions, right? Well, then point A to point B to point C. I mean, it's just, well, what if this was like, a sci-fi thing? Because I'm a big fan of sci-fi. And then I read the Geneva novel, and I was like, okay, well, let's throw this in here. And now this is why they're after him. Okay, this can be cool, because I've never seen a novel, or I've never seen a sci-fi character who's plagued by a disease like Alzheimer's, and because it was something that's so ubiquitous today that everybody knows somebody with Alzheimer's, and so I wanted to plug into that current pathos for this condition, and so I just I took the Springsteen character that he sketched out and went from there. This guy, he makes you feel sorry for a killer, he makes you sympathize with the killer, and that's what I was trying to do with Stax too.
What I love is that you can, this song, this moment of music can birth this thing, and if you tell that to someone after the book is finished, they may never see that connection. But for you, I bet every time you hear that song, all of this kind of rush of emotion comes back, because this is where ORP came from. Right.
That's exactly right.
It's crazy. So anyway, let's go back to you saw Dustin at the show with McMurtry, and what happened from there?
So I bought the CD, kind of got obsessed with that. I'm very obsessive compulsive. I know you don't know this about me.
Never guessed that.
Never. Yeah. And so if I hear something I like, I'll play it over and over and over and over and over again. And so the lyrics just kind of seeped into me. And as I was listening to it, the album itself has some specific noir type songs in it, but the whole album is sort of this sketchbook, to borrow a Washington Irving phrase, this sketchbook of characters going through very sort of dystopian, in our writer, sci-fi writer lingo, dystopian lifetimes, so to speak, times in their lives. And there were several songs in there. Whiskey Priest is one. Two Horses is another that I didn't use, actually. Don't Tell 'Em Nothing is one. Dirty Mind is one. And those, Dirty Mind, Don't Tell 'Em Nothing, and Whiskey Priest, I pulled lyrics from each of those for the novel, because I thought they help. The purpose of an epigraph is to set an atmosphere. And once you move past the epigraph, you should be set up for what's to come. And so his lyrics were so perfect for what I was trying to do with Stax, which is probably some kind of yin-yang symbiotic thing going on, right? I probably went a particular direction here or there because the lyrics were in the back of my head, So I used those to set up the book. And of course, you can't do that without getting permission. So I contacted Dustin and his publisher, and they were very forthcoming with allowing me to use the lyrics. And so they are now part of the epigraphs for each of the three parts of the novel.
Which really sets a stage, especially Whiskey Priest. When I first heard that song and read ORP, that's just Dustin, I'll get you to speak on this. The song Whiskey Priest is actually inspired by a book, isn't it? The Power and the Glory?
That's right. Yeah, Graham Greene novel.
Right. So what was the let's kind of backtrack with you for a second. How does literature inspire music in you?
Well, I want to say first that when Chris contacted me, I was going, a sci-fi novel? What? I mean, I'm a huge sci-fi fan. I've always have been, and definitely detective noir. Dashiell Hammett was one of my the kind of first author of that kind that I discovered, and moved on into Raymond Chandler, and eventually found Spillane and all those more hard-boiled guys, and I'm just I've always been an avid reader, And Graham Greene, most of his stuff is such like real dry British spy novels that he was, writing in the belly of a submarine off the coast of Africa or something with the, water dripping on his typewriter, and he just called them entertainments. He didn't even really imagine that they'd become classics at any point. But The Power and the Glory specifically, it was kind of a departure for him. I saw, and what struck me about that book, it follows, is a period of time in Mexico. I believe Oaxaca, the state of Oaxaca, although it's been years since I've gone back and reread it, but they had outlawed any kind of formal organized religion, and it follows this priest that's kind of on the run. So he, trying to escape going to jail or getting sent out of the country, and so he's still off. He's delivering mass in the middle of the night to anybody that'll hear him, who's brave enough for that. But this character, he's also fallible. He's got to find some kind of rum or whiskey or something wherever he goes just to settle his nerves, and so he's by no means perfect, and so they termed him a whiskey priest, which, so like you have this whole corruption of power going on overhead and this like removal of faith from this entire culture. And then, the kind of one solitary figure who's still trying to, brave it through, but he's got issues also, right? He's not by no means, the traditional hero character. And so I kind of took that concept and I started looking around at, modern day sort of culture and seeing how I could plug that in. And, as with most kind of metaphors, if one thing is true over here, it's going to be true over on the other side too, and on and on.
Which is why great Americana songs can play in futuristic sci-fi.
How about that? Yeah. And so, yeah, when he approached me about this, I was just going, okay, I got to know. And he sent me the manuscript, and I was going, well, gosh, this is perfect. These songs completely lined up. It was pretty striking to find out, and I really enjoyed the novel also. Of course, it was a great read. I flew through it, and yeah, somehow he was able to kind of glean, just from a couple lines from each of those songs, and they totally lined up.
It's so cool. You as a musician and as a songwriter, this has been kind of a lifelong pursuit of yours, hasn't it?
Yes, I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. My father's a songwriter.
Well, that'll do it.
And grew up just around some of the finest musicians and songwriters in the industry, really. And then, moved to Texas eventually. I think I was about 25, and immediately folks like McMurtry and Ray Wiley Hubbard and Joe Ely and John D. Graham, all great storytellers in their own right. Especially McMurtry, they're like little one-act plays. Every song of his, you can just these people right away. And that's what we have to do with songs, like you kind of mentioned. I always refer to it as like the economy of language, trying to get a paragraph's worth of information into one line. And so much of that, I try and look at these things like real cinematically. It's like the old, show me, don't tell me. Put images in there, put pictures, put things, environmental stuff happening. It doesn't have to be a direct narrative, but you're evoking this sort of feeling. So somehow in the listener's subconscious, these things are already kind of back there cooking. And, because what we're doing is it's being heard, it's not being read, and it's going by, as in real time as you're listening to it. So you have to be able to engage the listener that much more. They have to be able to you can only get halfway to them. That you have to get them to come the other half and meet you there, essentially. So it's like telling a joke. If you get through, a joke and you go, oh, and I forgot about this one part, and then you just completely lose them. You can't afford one, little thing. It has to just, keep engaging, and it's the whole tension release factor too. A lot of that is done musically. I don't know that everybody's is conscious of that kind of emotional, like trying to conjure some kind of emotion out of the listener. But that is something that I try and focus on. And yeah, like if this was a scene in a movie, if this is the opening scene, where's the camera at? Is it like way back up, getting a expansive shot, and then does it like zoom right in and here's the main character, or this is what's going on, what are they doing, and then show some kind of action or what, any of those things. Where's the camera pointing? What's going on in the background? Is it raining? How's the light look? What kind of sounds are you hearing? All those kind of things you can create that in such a way that you don't have to take a person by the hand and go, okay, well, first this is happening, and then and have to spell it out. You can just give them that one, picture's worth 1,000 words kind of image, and they already know the whole situation.
When right. Did you get a mandolin when you were 5 years old?
That was that was a thing my dad had. When I was born, he told himself, all right, this kid's going to get a guitar by the age of 5. And of course, he was still a struggling songwriter, and my mother she was a teacher, so they didn't have money for a guitar. And he was at he was writing for a publishing company in Nashville. It was Tree Publishing back in those days, and the revered songwriter Harlan Howard, millions of great songs. They were talking. I was born right before Christmas, and so they were about to break for the holiday, and they were talking, and he kind of was griping to Harlan that he'd meant to always get me a guitar by that age, even though what 5-year-old is going to be able to just immediately start rocking out.
Right.
But then they parted ways and said goodbye, and then as my dad was leaving, the gal at the front desk stopped him, and she said, Kev, Harlan left this for you, and there was a $100 bill in there, and he went out and bought me just this cheap little mandolin. But from then on, I was hooked. I mean, there was nothing I could do about it. I used to, pretend like I knew how to play and show off for my friends and stuff. But then about the time I turned 8, I had gone and I'd pick up my dad's guitars and be trying to fool around and start teaching myself and learn. And finally he went, would you like a guitar? He never was trying to push it on me. He didn't want me to feel like, oh, well, I got to be a musician like my old man. But yeah, we got this old Ward's catalog guitar from the 30s that we bought from a neighbor, and that's still the guitar I play today. It had a one like those 1930s guitar, big fat neck on it.
Yeah.
My hand literally grew around that neck. So, yeah, I had the rare education of anytime I, had any kind of questions, a lot of times I could go to the people who actually played on that record and go, all right, how'd you do this? And they were always just more than happy to sit down and show me. And, and so growing up in Nashville, I went the other way. I kind of went, I don't want to sound like all these folks. I need to, figure out my own voice. And I don't want people to always be like, well, that's Kevin's kid. So I had to, really, I made sure I was focused on kind of finding my own voice and creating my own style and everything. And as far as like writing goes, I got introduced to the Bill Moyers, Joseph Campbell stuff when I was a teenager, and just went all in on that. And I really, kind of decided to, in so many of those characters in the hero's journey, you got to drag them through all hell. And just make them suffer and just beat them down. And, but there's maybe one little glimmer of hope up there on the horizon. And, and that's where the redemption comes in. So I just released, a couple weeks ago, my third record, which is basically the third in a trilogy. I tried to take it in that way, like the first being the Descent into Hell, and that would be Whiskey Priest. The second album is called Tijuana Bible, and I kind of looked at that as sort of a purgatory. And then this last one is it's called Amateur Theater. So you got the priest, the Bible, and the theater. I didn't want to go with the church. I thought that would be a little too blatant. But this latest one, it's more kind of redemptive, and hopefully by the end, these characters kind of they come out on the other end as finding that hero.
Well, Dustin, when you talk to writers, something that comes up a lot is the style of prose, and something that we all strive for is kind of that lyrical prose that sucks a reader in, and you kind of get mesmerized by the meter and by the almost the melody of the words, if that's a thing that you can shoot for. You can put words together, but then you can put words together in a way that captivate, and it kind of become more than just the sum of the words. In songwriting, you've got this combination of melody and rhythm and poetry that become more than the sum of their parts. In a lot of your songs, and I've seen, a lot of your performances and stuff, and some of them you're playing banjo, which is a real percussive instrument, especially played the way you play it. And I can imagine learning to play mandolin, which can also be, a real percussive instrument, especially in like bluegrass styles. It almost becomes the snare drum and, kind of plays the backbeat. As well as a melodic instrument, but you're learning to play that way and with those instruments and around the people that you did. Does that shape the way that you write songs? Do you write lyrics first, then music? Do you write them together? Does one inform the other? And do they become bigger than the sum of their parts?
Well, every song's different. We always kind of say the song is the boss. So, you never know. I know that, like you think about the meter and the way rhymes work and inside rhymes, that can create its own meter and timing and tension and release also. Just the way we talk is melodic. So there's kind of a melody infused in that too. So with all of those things and trying to, have these kind of poetic ideas and allegory and all that. You also have to be, you want to make things accessible and almost conversational as well, but do it in a kind of crafty way, and then make it all rhyme, and and be able to evoke some kind of emotion in there, and so there's no one way to do it, and saying the song is the boss, you'll notice if all of a sudden something's not working or if it just doesn't feel right, then you got to just remove yourself from the equation and just back out of it. Take your ego away. Even if it's a great line, just put it over to the side, let it be an orphan line for another time. So there's, when all of those things kind of come together, you don't really have much of an explanation for it. I don't know if it's just kind of the practice of doing it. I know that's a big part of it, and then whatever inspiration is. But there are times where I'll finish something and I'll kind of look back and go, I don't remember actually writing that. That it's a weird sensation, but you have to always be conscious of the listener. So you don't want to start using big, $50 words if that's not how you talk, because nobody's going to buy that as you're, sitting up there and they're all looking at you and you're trying to, get in this little 3-4 minute thing that might have taken you 2 years to write.
Right. The 3 albums that you've done, you said are kind of a trilogy. Do they follow the same character, the whiskey priest, throughout the whole story?
Not necessarily. That's why I don't know that trilogy is the right word for it. It was kind of more thematic, and it doesn't follow through entirely with each record, but it also kind of ended up becoming one of those self-fulfilling prophecy kind of things where I wrote a whole, some of these songs and going, well, gosh, where did that come from? And then, 2 years later, you find yourself as that character or in that situation. I think that, there were songs that I had on the newest record that I had before I made the first one, but I just knew that it didn't kind of fit in with that batch. So I did try and design it in such a way, and then there were some songs that I just liked the way the band played it. And so whatever band I would be using at the time. So it's a pretty loose trilogy, but I think all in all, thematically, they have, it sort of follows that kind of feeling, I guess. I don't know. It's, I could be completely out of my mind. I sort of look at it like that. I don't know if anybody else would realize it, but.
Well, I know that Chris, in a character like Stax, and this book not only spawned this book, but the 2 trilogies that you've written with David, and I think you guys still planning a 3rd trilogy at some point, aren't you?
Yeah, that's on the horizon, maybe. Yep.
Did you ever imagine that all that could be spawned from this story? That started with a song.
Nope.
Nope,
well, not at all.
It's such a weird thing that when you spend so much time with these characters and this setting, this world that you built, when it's time to move on, a lot of times you're kind of sick of it because you've been editing and
right.
reading and getting feedback. But kind of like when a woman goes through childbirth, as time stretches on, you start forgetting the bad parts and you start kind of feeling nostalgic for these characters again. And like, oh, this was such a great time. Do you ever get like that, Dustin, with songs or with albums? that you hate to let these characters go and the inspiration that was coming at the time? And do you ever get nostalgic for things that are finished and moved past?
I could see that, yeah. And then there are some, of course, that I'm really happy to go ahead and put to bed, but I think there's going back to that sort of hero's journey, they all kind of boil down to at one point in that place, and so it's just kind of exploring where each of these characters might fit into that place. And so sometimes I'll look at a batch of songs and I'll go, well, we got a great big hole right here, so I need to find a character that fits into that place. And then there are some that that I do try and get back into that same character. Sometimes, yeah, I'll even take a character out of a novel and I'll put them into whatever situation I want to talk about. But it's like I'm trying to picture how that character would react into there, and I would go back and use those characters quite a bit, or from a film or something. And I'd take that character and put them into other situations and see what they did there, and how they would react in that kind of environment. That's an interesting kind of almost kind of visualization technique I'll use, I guess.
Which it strikes me that's very similar to the writing, the fiction writing approach, right? Where you sort of sketch out your characters. At least my approach is to sketch out your characters, and hopefully you have some idea where the plot is going to go. And I always say character first, right? Not plot. So so it's a seedy bar. It's after 2:00 in the morning. There's some weirdos in the corner that look like they could be dangerous. So I'm going to take my protagonist, and he's had 2 drinks in. So let's see what happens when he gets up and goes to the bathroom, and see what happens if they going to jump him, or and then the character reacts to the atmosphere, and that's how the character develops is through their reactions to what they're dropped into the middle of. So that's the way I approach it too.
Yeah, like, okay, what would Mike Hammer do if he was in a department store, and the woman tries to come up and spray perfume on him, or I don't know, like,
right.
I love putting characters in situations that they would never have encountered otherwise, and then just see what would happen next, and just write that. A lot of times it's, but what's so interesting, and is that I was pulling from these literary sources, and then doing my take on it, and then next Chris is taken from the song and turning it back into it's like something real meta about that, or something. I don't know.
Yeah, as Darth Vader would say, the circle is now complete.
And we're all students of the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell. I think if you pick any genre, fiction writer, and he or she will have been through Joseph Campbell a time or two. That's so interesting that you as well. Chris, speaking of that, when you've got a character like Stax, and he's not your typical protagonist that you would drop into the hero's journey, but what were some of the challenges you kind of stacked the deck against yourself in the beginning, because we know that Stax is not long for this world. How did that?
Spoilers.
Well, I mean, you Alzheimer's and stuff.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Eventually.
Yeah. Eventually,
we all go take the big long dirt nap. That's right.
We do, but does that affect the way you set him on the path? Did Did giving yourself that handicap, air quotes, did that affect the way the story unfolded?
I'm sure it did. I can't tell you how, but you could also say that it opened up opportunities, because if you don't think you have much time, then you don't have to worry about being Mr. Nice Guy. And you don't have to worry about the social proprieties. You don't have to worry about the crap that we obsess about every day, until we realize that time is in fact finite, and we're not going to be on the planet the whole time, where we actually only going to be here a few years, an eye blink in the universe. So, when you give a character a fatal disease, I mean, if you go back to the Greek plays and the fatal flaw, right? Is it limiting? Sure, for the obvious reasons, but it can also be liberating, because it can open up the storyline to something that a typical character without that flaw or without that disease would never explore. They would never go down that path because they don't have to.
Right. Well, and it also, you say that it frees him up from social propriety, but it also brings in the element of, when we're worried about our mortality, we start thinking about things like saving our soul. Maybe not necessarily in the religious sense, but, making peace with our time here on Earth.
Right.
And you said that you approach story character first, and there's no better exploration of character than them dealing with their own mortality and what their impact on the Earth was.
Yeah, that's true. And you see in Stax, and I say in the afterward, if I manage to get the reader to sympathize with somebody who kills other people for a living, well, then I've done my job. Right. I've done the hard work of the writer, right? So Stax has a personal code, and you see that code expressed in the novel towards other characters. He sort of people that deserve to get the bad end of the stick get it, and people that are preyed on by others, he protects or avenges in some cases. So the reason I think a reader comes to sympathize with Stax, if they do, is because he's a straight arrow kind of guy for a soulless killer, kind of thing. But he's somebody who does the right thing, not the expedient thing, and not the political thing, and not the socially propriety thing. He does the thing that needs to be done, even if it's hard to do. He's a good human being who happens to kill other human beings, which I know sounds like a joke, but his character is expressed in the way he treats others, I guess. And if they deserve justice, they get it, and if they deserve protection, they get it. That's and especially as he's facing his own mortality. I mean, when you've got an existential crisis like that, and you're trying to make your time on Earth seem like it was worth something, that's when your true character comes out. And I think you see that in Stax as the novel develops.
What were some of the challenges of writing a noir character in a futuristic setting? Did those two genre conventions ever bump up against each other, or was it just all fun and games?
It was all fun and games. No, I never really had a problem with it. Instead of he actually carries a revolver, but instead of a revolver from the 50s, he also has a stunner, which is an electromagnetic handgun. Instead of hopping in a taxi cab and driving across town, he hops in the hearse, his spaceship, and flies to the moon. I mean, the distances are longer and there's space instead of highways, but it's the same thing. It's like Han Solo is just a cowboy in space in Star Wars. So you substitute out the tools, but the basics tropes and idioms are still there.
Yeah. Chris, I know that when you write, you demand silence. You don't like noise. You don't like music. You want to write in complete silence. I might write with classical that is not opera, because I can't stand opera. But I can't
I wouldn't be able to write to Dustin's music because my head, I want to start singing along with the lyrics, and then I can't think the words to get them on the page. That's why I can't write with music.
See, I am the complete opposite. I don't mind a little chaos around, probably because I have 5 kids, and that's been and I like to write to music, and it doesn't, for some reason, I don't go down the rabbit hole of the music. It just kind of becomes the controlled chaos in the background. I don't know. Dustin, when you're working on writing, and since you're writing music mostly, that would seem to be counterintuitive to have other inspiring stuff around you. But what do you do as a musician with your influences? Do you listen to stuff and get inspired and then write along that emotional vein that you hit? Do you like silence? How does that work for you?
It's all sorts of different things, and I'm constantly taking little notes, phrases, words, even just things that I'll pick up around me, and I'll jot them down, and at some point I'll be working on something, and I'll start going through it, and I'll go, ooh, there's one, but sometimes if I, because with I don't know, for me, if I'm sitting there for too long, things will just come to a grinding halt. I got to get up and walk around, and but there's times where I'll just go sit at the end of a bar, some noisy bar, and just sit there and write on a bar napkin and just kind of be taking notes, and whether that has anything to do with what's going on around me doesn't even necessarily matter, but. Sometimes I just got to have something else going on that'll sort of shake me loose, and then a lot of that kind of visual element. If I'm driving down the road and I got the radio blaring, and all of a sudden I get hit with something. That'll happen too, and just got to pull off and scribble something down. But a lot of that stuff, it kind of comes in pieces to me.
Growing up in Nashville, I know Nashville is a serious songwriters town, and when you meet songwriters and they talk about having writing appointments, and like it's a serious thing in a town like Nashville where songwriting is is the most important, and people approach it like a job. Growing up in a place like that, and your dad was a songwriter, did any of that songwriting ethic bleed over into you? Do you pursue songwriting the same way, or are you like a lot of us novelists, and inspiration comes along and we write furiously for a month, and then maybe not so much for a month? Does the record cycle affect writing? Kind of what's your day-to-day writing like?
I used to be a lot more disciplined, and I know a lot of authors who from 10 to 2, and songwriters as well, but if 2 o'clock rolls around and they're in the middle of a sentence, they will get up, and then there's some folks they'll who was it? Maybe it was Hemingway or something was saying he would get up right until he knew what was coming next, and then he would stop. And that way, the next day, those guys, they were just so diligent. You read some of Steinbeck's journals, and he was an everyday guy. He would start out writing to his editor and just kind of get his pen flowing a little bit, and a lot of times he wouldn't even be talking about what was going on and whatever he was working on. For me, I really enjoy co-writing because it gets you talking about things, and also because I know that from at 2 o'clock I've got this writing appointment, and so I'm going to sit down and I better damn come up with something. But when it's just left to me, a lot of times it'll just be like I'll just end up with a pile of things, and I'll just kind of start start kind of sorting them out, and I'll go, okay, actually, this could all be one idea, and then when I see that come and take shape, then I can just start filling it all in. If I sit down and I've got no ideas, sometimes there are sort of things I do to sort of trick my mind into it, sort of visualization practices. I'll put myself I'll go, okay, well, what am I feeling like right now? And if I'm feeling this way, what would be the ideal stage or venue that I'd be singing at and playing? And then I'll turn it around and put myself in the audience, and I'll go, okay, well, what am I listening to now? What does that sound like? What is the person on stage talking about? And then sometimes, it doesn't always work, but sometimes it'll trick my mind into going, it'll be like a fully formed song almost. There's just little things like that I'll do to shake myself loose. If I'm going, okay, I just sit down and do some writing, even if I don't have any ideas.
Right. The book is out today, Optional Retirement Plan. Chris, the audiobook comes out in a couple weeks, right?
Yep, November 19th, read by R.C. Bray.
Never heard of him.
Yeah, I know. We were lucky to, find somebody. But no, anyway, he's like the most popular military sci-fi narrator on Amazon. That's all.
He's also Mark Watney.
That's right, from The Martian. That's exactly right. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, he is Mark Watney. I don't care what that guy on screen says.
Whatever. I'm sure they just picked up his voice or something.
Yeah. How cool is it having your words read and performed by a narrator who can really do it justice?
Dude, I got a preview of the first chapter about a week ago, and he just nails Stax. He really gets that character, the whole genre. He does all of the characters in the book. Oh, well, the first chapter that I heard anyway, great. I'm sure the rest of the book too, but he really nails that first-person noir Stax Fischer character. He just really knocks it out of the park.
Well, I can't wait to hear him reading Dustin's words as well. That is going to be surreal for me to kind of have, like we said earlier, this whole thing kind of come full circle.
Right, absolutely.
So, Dustin, I think you and Chris talked earlier, and would you do us the pleasure of sharing one of your songs with us?
Yeah, he was asking for the Whiskey Priest song. He described that as Stax theme song.
That's right.
Which I can totally see now after having read it. It was not intended like that, but this is a very flawed protagonist. Trying to do the right thing. Sorry.
Dustin, can you tell people where they can find you online? And I know you've got a new record out. Give it a plug and tell folks where they can find you.
Yeah, all three of these albums, Whiskey Priest, Tijuana Bible, and the new Amateur Theater, are available on Amazon and iTunes. Any of your streaming platforms. My website is just dustinwelch.com. And there's a contact page on there that goes to me if you just want to get a hold of me for any reason. Also, if I can, I'll get back to you. And I typically perform around the Texas area, I guess. Not terribly hard to find. And then tour throughout the country, a few times a year. Canada, Australia, Europe sometimes as well. Just look me up and check out the albums. I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about it.
I'll link them up in the show notes of this episode where people can easily find them. They'll be right there. Chris, Optional Retirement Plan is out in print today. Audio in a couple of weeks.
Ebook. It's an ebook.
Okay. Gotcha.
The paperback will be out, but the ebook is out today.
Gotcha. Okay. Tell folks where they can find you. We'll put a link to the book, obviously, in the show notes. But tell folks where you live online.
Sure. ChrisPourteau.com. Pretty simple, although the last name, Pourteau, so it's ChrisPourteau.com. I can't even spell it myself.
You bitch at everybody for misspelling your name.
I know. I can't even spell it myself.
Yeah, I can't even spell it. Well, will there be links to all of that in the show notes? We're now going to hear Dustin with the Whiskey Priest. I'm so glad you chose the song, Chris, instead of Sympathy for the Devil as the...
Yeah, well, the Stones were no inspiration at all for this novel, first of all. Second of all, this is the only reason I showed up today was to hear this live again. So, there you go.
All right. Dustin, take it away.
Right on. Okay. You can hear that all right?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Get me out of town before they run me off. Once we're high enough, I'll get out and walk. Yeah, well, you know the way they can lead you on. I don't have a choice, got to take them all, cause the system is fixed with eyes upon eyes. Dirty little secret white lie alibis. And now, even if you got nothing to hide, they don't need to ask, they just read your mind. But I made whiskey grease is a blood-soaked religion. I made whiskey grease is a blood-soaked religion. I made whiskey grease is a blood-soaked religion. I made whiskey grease and it's blood-soaked, it's blood-soaked. I am a man of faith, I am a child of the crow, and all of my better angels, well, they touch and they go. I get no self-satisfaction from salvation when it's sold with a 10-digit digital magnetic barcode. So I kneel down on my knees to pray. I whisper speculation, holy rumor, hearsay. God bless the poor and the feeble, and they try to maintain a sense of false repletion and a marker for their claim. And I am a whiskey grease is a blood-soaked religion. I am a whiskey grease is a blood-soaked religion. I am a whiskey grease is a blood-soaked religion. I am a whiskey grease and it's blood-soaked, it's blood-soaked. Soldier, sailor, drive that steel machine. Rich and poor man, beggar, thief, you better keep your pistol clean. Tinker, tailor, soldier, sailor, drive that steel machine. Rich and poor man, beggar, thief, you better keep your pistol clean. Tinker, tailor, soldier, sailor, drive that steel machine. Oh, rich and poor man, beggar, thief, you better keep your pistol clean. Come on now, can't you hear the distant sirens ring? A junkie, drunk, you ruckus punk, believe me when I sing. I make whiskey grease is a blood-soaked religion. I make whiskey grease is a blood-soaked religion. I make whiskey grease is a blood-soaked religion. I make whiskey grease and it's blood-soaked, it's blood-soaked. I love the smell of rain upon an answer to a prayer. The smell of fresh black powder when it's hanging in the air, and it must stand to reason as beyond compare. When every breath I take is another I'm sparing. When I come a willing servant, I'd go an able culprit if I had a chance in hell. Probably I already took it, that bastard Satan's bony ass. I do my best to whoop it with the Bible in my holster and shot glass in my pulpit, and I am a whiskey priest is a blood salt religion. I am a whiskey priest is a blood salt religion. I am a whiskey priest is a blood salt religion. I am a whiskey priest wet in the water, children. I am a whiskey priest wet in the water, children. I am a whiskey priest wet in the water, children. I am a whiskey priest, and his blood salt is blood salt.
Fantastic.
Dude, that was awesome.
Friggin-tastic.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
Dustin and Chris, thanks for joining me this evening.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
That was a pleasure. Yeah, you guys go out and read this book.
Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Hello, young one. What ghoulish tale of horror shall we explore tonight? Shall we watch The Creepshow? The Nightmare on Elm Street? Child of the night, give me your answer.
Which one would Mom kill us for watching? Said Buddy.
Dad grinned and his eyes grew wide. Which do you think, Child of the Jackal?
The Omen!
And we might have time for Omen too, if we hurry. She'll be home by 11.
I'll be back. Buddy ran to his room. He stripped down to his Yoda underwear and fished in the closet. 2 minutes later, he snuck back into the living room wearing his skeleton costume from last Halloween. He crept up behind his dad, who was cueing the movie. But David Rittermeyer was too clever for that. He spun around at the last moment and bared fanged teeth torn from paper plates, drawing a yip of surprise and a cry of, "No fair!" Daddy kicked off his Reeboks, plopped his smelly gym socks on the coffee table, another thing that Mom would hate, and killed the lights. The scary intro music began. The screen showed the silhouette of a boy, about Buddy's age. His shadow was a long, creepy cross. The Antichrist, the son of the devil. Born of a jackal on a night of astrological portent, destined to bring about the end times and the final battle of good versus evil. Buddy sipped Sunkist and scooted up next to his dad. As the movie got scarier, he slipped an arm through his father's and cupped his big bicep. Buddy could feel his father's pulse. Dads get scared too. They flinched together, shouted together, pointed at the screen and covered their faces together. Buddy pressed his eyes to Daddy's shoulder just before the on-screen maid shouted, "It's all for you, Damien!" and dove from the roof, hanging herself. Buddy knew which parts he was old enough to watch and which parts he wasn't. He trusted his dad to let him know when to look again. Occasionally, his dad tricked him into peeking too soon, but that was part of the fun. They kicked their feet at the screen and shouted, "Look up! Look up! Oh, idiot! Don't get yourself killed!" At the climax, the hero of the movie, Mr. Thorne, discovered a birthmark of 3 6s on his son's head and dragged the little Antichrist to the altar of the church, determined to spear his son with holy daggers and end evil forever. After it was over, the Rittermeyer men sat silently through the credits. David put an arm around his son and ran his fingers through Buddy's hair. He wasn't searching for devil marks. He knew there weren't any. And Buddy was certain there were no daggers in his father's hand either. Those things were just make-believe. Real fathers and sons don't do bad things to each other. They were queuing up Omen 2 when the power went out. "No," Buddy whined. "Not on movie night." Daddy went to the window. "It's the whole block. Sorry, Damien. How about, scary blackout. Go get the Ouija board out of the guest room closet." "Cool. And candles." Buddy found the Ouija board, hidden under old clothes. When he shut the sliding door again, the sight of a monster startled him, and he let out an involuntary, "huh" sound. It was his own skeleton-bodied reflection in the mirrored closet door. He stared at it. He liked the effect of moonlight on his cheeks. Spectral, haunted, his eyes big and white. He clacked his teeth at himself, picturing his own grinning skull under his child's flesh, and gave an evil laugh. He was answered by a scream. A woman's scream. High-pitched and far away. One of the neighbors? Buddy dropped the Ouija board into a patch of moonlight and sat with it. "What's going on?" he whispered, his fingers on the heart-shaped wood planchette.